Hi, I'm Paul Rushworth-Brown, host of History Bards, Down Under Interviews, and Meet the Author in the US. And I'm here with a very interesting author who's written a fantastic book called The Valet's Witness, Rohn Hein. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
All I can say is, wow, wow, wow. We had a bit of a chat about your novel a couple of days ago, and all I can say is it brings up some very interesting topics and some very interesting subjects about slavery and the Declaration of Independence in the USA. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a synopsis about the novel?
Well, the book is about the Declaration of Independence and how it came to be as it is. We follow through the eyes of Edward Rutledge, who was the delegate from South Carolina, part of the delegation. He was actually the youngest signer of the Declaration when it was finally adopted. And also through the eyes of his black valet, Pompey. What we do is take a look at both all the workings that Rutledge did in order to make sure that slavery was not mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, but also hear conversation among all the black valets that were brought by the Southern delegates to Philadelphia to show off their wealth and their power. What happens is that the black valets have their own opinion about what they think is going on in Independence Hall. And needless to say, it's a whole lot different than what the Patriots did.
History remembers the names of the powerful, the men who stood in candlelit rooms and shaped the future of a nation. But beyond those doors stood others, watching, listening, carrying truths history rarely recorded. In colonial Charleston, wealth and influence flourished beside slavery. The language of liberty filled the air, while countless lives remained unseen. The Valet's Witness explores the American founding era through the eyes of Pompey, a black valet who observed the conversations, contradictions, and silences surrounding the birth of a nation. This is not simply a story about politics. It is a story about power, memory, and the people history left standing in the shadows. In this conversation, author Rohn Hein reflects on Edward Rutledge, South Carolina society, and the uneasy tension between freedom and slavery during America's earliest years. Some stories refuse to stay buried, and some witnesses were never truly silent.
And what do they say?
Well, the basic line is these white men have no idea what slavery is about. They're worried about being enslaved by the King of England, and the valets say to themselves, they have no clue about what it is to be a slave.
Yeah, yeah. So Rutledge is obviously a huge sort of like part of the book. Why not Jefferson?
Well, I wanted to take a look at sort of the average person that was going there, delegate wise. Jefferson is praised excessively in the United States about authorship of the Declaration. I wanted someone to have a look at what else was going on there. What was amazing is that I was actually doing research on Jefferson and the Declaration when I decided to do this book.
Okay. So now one of the interesting things that came up when we were talking about your novel is that I mean the Declaration is all about sort of like liberty and freedom and all that type of thing, and yet most of the founding fathers actually owned slaves. What's all that about?
It is the great paradox of the Declaration of Independence. You're absolutely correct. almost every delegate had some kind of stake in the slavery business that was going on in the United States. Almost a majority of them currently owned slaves themselves. And, it's difficult for, I think, people in present day understand how pervasive this slave program was going on throughout the United States at the time.
Yeah. Do you think your novel asks some dangerous questions that people might, especially Americans, might find confronting?
Oh, well, the very fact that these delegates brought slaves to Philadelphia, you do not see that information in the history book. I mean, if you just start with that fact to begin with, you got to scratch your head and go, what else was going on there in Philadelphia? There's no doubt in my mind that the product, the Declaration of Independence, still remains one of the most important documents in world history. But by saying that does not mean that it was perfect.
Yeah.
When the slaves heard the words, all men are created equal, they wanted to believe that the delegates included them, but they knew in their hearts that that wasn't the case.
Yeah. Now, Ron, I assume that most slaves back in the time couldn't read. So how did they get a true understanding of obviously they would have listened to the conversations. If Pompey was a valet, so he would have heard conversations. But how did they really understand the guts of what was going on without being able to read newspapers and that type of thing?
Well, if you take Jefferson at his words that all humans have inalienable rights, it's not hard to understand how the slaves understood this language that was being, bandied about. Sure, you're absolutely correct. It was illegal to educate slaves in many colonies. And so, it wasn't that they read the documents. They heard the word. They heard the conversations over table conversation at the dinner table. They were in the committee room sometimes when they were discussing this. They were at the City Tavern, a very famous place where delegates met after the fact. The business was transacted there also. The presence of those black valets was everywhere. And when they got together, they compared notes. They talked about it. And they understood what freedom and liberty really was.
In 1937, life offered little mercy, and for Vesta Blahnik, each day felt like one more step toward losing everything she had ever known. On a struggling Minnesota farm, she worked from dawn until long after dark, holding together a home her father had already decided to leave behind. When he sold the farm without a word, Vesta was left with no money, no security, and nowhere to go. Her only lifeline came in the form of letters, promises of stability from a man she had never met. Desperate, she put her future in the hands of strangers, hoping the truth would be kinder than the world she was running from. But in North Carolina, Gordon Crenshaw faced a darkness of his own. A widower consumed by grief, confined to a state hospital and forgotten by the family who sent those letters in his name. When Vesta arrived, the promises collapsed. Two strangers, both abandoned in different ways, forced together by desperation, circumstance, and the simple need to survive. Now they must find a way to build a life from whatever pieces the world has left for them.
Yeah. So do you think, as far as the members of Congress, I mean, that's silence. Was it political survival, or was it avoidance or moral avoidance?
I think it was expedience. They knew that there was a contradiction between their words and their actions. As we mentioned earlier, many of these people owned slaves, but their main goal was to become independent from the king. And as Rutledge kept saying to many of the delegates as he had conversations about the process that was going on, we don't have enough time and energy and resources to take a look and solve the slavery problem here. In fact, I don't even think it's a problem, he says. But everyone knew that was like the third rail of political conversation. You just didn't bring the topic up because there was no easy answer.
Okay, so in the novel, you try to sort of like move away from that myth, that romanticized version of the American founding. Were you trying to do that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a saying that goes around. Everybody thinks that Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson said it, but it's highly controversial that the victors write history, and that's what we see. Particularly what's going on in the present day society here in America about the elimination of DEI, diversity, education, inclusion. They don't even want to have that conversation. They want to deny that there's even a need for having those conversations. I think my role as an author is the responsibility is to lift up those thoughts, take a look at the full picture, not just what the main players want us to see.
Yeah, I was doing my research, and I noticed a photo of you on the web standing in front of a poster saying Black Lives Matter. Are you aware of the photo?
Absolutely. Ever since the George Floyd murder that took place in 2020, the movement of Black Lives Matter got center stage. And it seemed like for a time that we were really going to have an honest conversation. And just as the founding fathers found this a difficult conversation, people here today, they seem to think that if they just move away from that conversation, that it'll go away. Yeah. And then you have even other people who say, problem. We don't have any problems. We are a colorblind society. We need that conversation today. And I hope that my book at least will open up the idea that maybe we should talk some more about this.
Yeah. Pompey, the protagonist, did he become the real center of the novel as you wrote it?
Well, I think for certain that he knew what was going on. The one thing about Black Valets was it was actually in the self-interest of the masters for them to be at least partially literate.
How do you write, being an American white man, how do you write a character like Pompey, who's carrying that level of tension?
Well, it truly is difficult for a white male, someone who's moderately successful, to get into the shoes, under the skin of people who are enslaved. No doubt in my mind. I've been very fortunate in that there are a number of my good friends who keep me honest about what that's like. Should this book be written by a Black woman? It would be nice.
Do you think there's going to be a backlash?
My guess is probably so. When I first started doing research for this book, I went down to Charleston, South Carolina, and trying to get information. I talked to some people who were very supportive of what I was starting. I wasn't exactly sure how the book was going to play out, but I knew that I wanted to focus in on Rutledge. And numerous people say, oh, that's great. There is no definitive history on Edward Rutledge. When I sent PDF versions of my book to some of the people in South Carolina, I got no response at all. And my guess is it was a little painful hearing some of the words, because he's their founding father.
What would white Americans, they read it, what are they going to get from it?
Well, I hope what they get from this is that even though slavery is not mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, it was a topic of conversation. And as usual, it was put on the back burner. We'll deal with this later.
You walk into a cafe in South Carolina and sit down at the bar and have a coffee, and Pompey's beside you. Tell me about the discussion.
That things have not changed.
1776, same thing. The discussion between you and Pompey.
Yeah, my guess is that the conversation would be the same. That's the whole thing.
Reverence for the founding fathers. Do you think they're locked in and protected emotionally by Americans?
We have the founding fathers up on such a high pedestal that any critique whatsoever is labeled as being unpatriotic, which is ludicrous. I love my country. One of my favorite phrases in the Constitution is the very first word, in order to create a more perfect union. More perfect. That means that there is still work to be done.
If Pompey could stand outside Independence Hall today and speak directly to America, what's he going to say?
All men are created equal. Let's practice that instead of just say it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 10 quick fire questions, and you just reply 1 or 2 word answers unless I ask you to expand on it. All right? Okay. First question: writing or research?
Writing.
Archive or imagination?
Oh, imagination.
Pompey or Rutledge?
Pompey.
Witnessing or speaking?
Speaking.
Most surprising discovery during the research?
Slaves in Philadelphia.
A historical figure who changed in your mind while writing the book?
Jefferson.
Which character unsettled you the most?
John Hancock.
A book that changed the way you see history?
How to be non-racist.
Hardest scene to write?
With his other black valets after the adoption of the Declaration.
Okay. One word that defines the valet's witness?
I want to say more than one word. A new view.
Okay. Ron, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Congratulations on the novel. It's definitely something that I'd like to read.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to Down Under Interviews. We speak with authors from around the world about the stories behind their work and the human cost behind history. Cheers.